Hello, I'm with Dr. Robert Werker, who did his Masters in Science and PhD at the Imperial College in London, who is an ecologist. I'm so glad that you agreed to be on my show, Unlock Your Health, Dr. Robert Werker.
Thank you very much indeed, Vijay. It's a pleasure.
So, you are an expert in sustainable healthcare. Can you very quickly explain what sustainable healthcare is about?
Sustainable healthcare is really just looking at a healthcare system that looks at human beings as part of a wider ecosystem that is able to exist and coexist with the natural environment for eternity.
Okay, so that brings me to asking you this question. Can you talk about the pros and cons of veganism?
I think it's really easy to be a very healthy vegan if you have basically an entire supply of any kind of plant food that you could possibly want in front of you. The reality is that for many people, that supply is very, very simplified because we live in industrial systems. I think from a planetary point of view, veganism absolutely is a sustainable system of agriculture. What we see for people who are not careful with what they're eating is that they can have deficiencies in particular groups, and that really applies to anyone that leaves out an important food group. And I'm certainly not saying that if you eat meat, you won't have deficiencies, because essentially we just substitute out one thing, put it in, and you get a lot of people who are omnivores eating a large amount of meat, who actually, statistically, from all of the research, are the unhealthiest people on the planet.
Right. So, when it comes to vegetarianism, people believe that, of course we know that through research, plant-based diets are really highly sustainable and they are very good for human health. But Dr. Robert Werker has just spoken to me about the difference between a tomato which is grown in the soil and a tomato that's grown hydroponically, which is what we get in most of the supermarkets. Can you just touch upon, what is the difference and why are they different?
As we move into more and more industrial agricultural systems, we've tried and develop systems that are easier to produce foods that can be distributed in different parts of the world as effectively the food supply is globalized. And if we look, for example, at many of the salad vegetables today, we're seeing most of them have switched to hydroponic systems of agriculture, in which the plant does not grow in a living soil. It doesn't grow in a soil at all. It exists in a water solution to which a limited number of nutrients are provided. That's a little bit like deciding that the human gut microbiome is not important and it's okay to have antibiotics all the time, and you just take a central vitamin tablet. It seems that what plants require is this complex matrix of living organisms around the root system that allows it to select the right nutrients, and then we also need the plant to actually exist for its natural life cycle to the point that we have become accustomed to eating that fruit. So we pick it early and then we ethylene ripen. We actually prevent the development of all the phytochemicals that we'd otherwise get, and that's why a vine ripened tomato from southern Italy will taste fantastic, and yet one you buy in a supermarket here may not taste so good. And that is our taste buds actually acting a bit like a gas liquid chromatograph, detecting the differences in the phytochemical distribution in the food itself.
And Robert, you mentioned that even those vegetables which are grown organically, we may not get the complete benefit of it, particularly the stone fruits. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so we've got to remember that an organic system at the moment is still basically a free-from agricultural system. It's a free-from pesticides, synthetic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. It does not mean it's necessarily grown in a sustainable system.
So what's the impact of that? Because it's not grown in a sustainable system. Is there an example that you can?
Well, unfortunately, what has happened is that if you look now at published research, you'll see that there is more and more research that compares the health effects of organically grown crops against non-organically grown crops, and very often they say, well, there's no difference. And if you look at those studies, what you'll find is that the organically grown crops are often coming out of an industrial agriculture system that just doesn't have those pesticides. It is not necessarily using a double digging system that's promoting, a healthy soil. It's certainly not using, say, heritage varieties where we're looking at the older genetic types along which humans have co-evolved with. We're looking at the effects of plant breeding. Many of us are very concerned about genetic modification, but we've got to understand that plant breeding, as well as animal breeding, yields foods that are very, very different from those that we've co-evolved with for millennia.
Right. And Robert, as most of us today talk about how farming, particularly dairy farming, results in greenhouse gases. It's actually not sustainable for the environment. And you, in the interview, also mentioned that if you're drinking milk, then it would be like drinking diluted pus.
Yeah.
But you also said that that's not the case if you actually look after the cows in a different way and drink the raw milk from these cows.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the plus aspects of drinking whole milk? Because we do know about the negatives.
Absolutely. So the essentially what has happened is that because of the government policies to promote low-fat foods, we've seen this huge expansion of skim milk products and semi-skim milk products. And essentially, when you do that, you interfere with the saturated fatty acid, essential fatty acid profile of those milks. And what you do is you take out very specific saturated fatty acids that we know are very good for us. And one of the ones that we have increasing data for is what we now call omega-7, palmitoleic acid, which turns out to be a really important modulator of other fats, other lipids in the body. So if we consume skim milk products, we don't get it. If we consume whole milk products, we do get it. And of course, if you look at the cohort data from observational studies, what we see is actually people who consume whole milk products actually have lower all-cause mortality, low risk of cardiovascular disease. So, why on earth are governments still telling people to have low-fat products? It's one of the biggest mistakes that we've made in society, in public health.
Yeah, so finally, my question to Robert would be, you are an entomologist, somebody who studies or has studied insects. Are insects going to be the future food for humans?
Yes, I say that as an entomologist, I believe we should eat insects as a protein source. That doesn't mean that medical doctors should eat humans, by the way. But yes, as we look at the fact that the protein requirement is really important for human development, in many societies where we don't consume enough protein, what people do is replace it with starchy carbohydrates. And an excess consumption of starchy carbohydrates leads to all sorts of problems, metabolic disease, etc. So, but there's no doubt that consuming animal proteins from large animals in intensive factory farm situations is doing no end of damage to the environment. It's energetically, ecologically incredibly inefficient and leads to a very high proportion of methane and other greenhouse gases. Moving to a system in which we have entomophagy, in which we consume more insects as a protein source, pretty much eliminates all those problems. I'm not saying that there won't be issues of animal cruelty. And one of the strange things is as we start managing and farming animals that are more different from ourselves as warm-blooded mammals, we start to be less concerned. I'm increasingly concerned with the state of fish farming, for example. It's appalling to look at the conditions that some of these fish are growing in, and I'd hate to see a similar thing happening to insects.
So there are pros and cons to any decision that we take if we are thinking about our health or sustainability of the environment. But the most important thing is just don't go by what the popular media says. But it's important to understand the science behind it. And I'm very, very pleased, Dr. Robert Werker, that you have spent 50 long minutes talking about the details of science behind veganism, vegetarianism, dairy, and insects as potential food. So do stay tuned to Unlock Your Health, and the website is www.uyhradio.com. Thank you, Dr. Werker.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Thank you.